LPD 1041.
Signal 10 assistance.
Inside the Squad, presented by the Lafayette Police Department. To serve and protect is not just a motto, it's our mission.
Sending another unit.
Step it up.
Welcome back to Inside the Squad. This episode, we're going to cover a heavy topic, but it needs to be addressed. I'm here with the best of the best. April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month. Sexual assault is a highly prevalent, yet rarely addressed issue and is considered the most underreported crime. I have some statistics here from RAINN, Rape, Abuse, Incest National Network. Out of 1,000 sexual assault incidents, 975 perps will walk free. 310 are reported to the police. 50 reports lead to arrest. 28 cases will lead to a felony conviction, and 25 perps will be incarcerated. So these are not promising statistics, and we hope after today our listeners will receive some very helpful information that will start to create a change in these statistics. So we're here to walk you through the process of what happens once an incident occurs and how we as a community bond together to do our very best to find justice for the victim. So today I'm here with a few professionals from LPD, YWCA, IU Health, and Riley and Franciscan to help explain what survivors experience in the aftermath of sexual violence and during police investigations. So let's start out. Let's go around the table, say your name, who you're with, what you do. Norah, take us away.
I'm Norah Ashcraft. I'm the legal advocate for the YWCA, and I have an office here at the police department and work as a victim advocate here.
Okay, and I'm Tanya Malone, and I'm a forensic nurse. I work for Riley, Methodist, and for Franciscan here in Lafayette.
I'm Alex Baker. I'm also a forensic nurse. I am with IU Health West Central Region, which responds to 3 different hospitals, IU Arnett, Frankfurt, and IU White Memorial in Monticello.
And I'm Dan Long. I'm the lieutenant of the Special Victims Unit here at the Lafayette Police Department.
All right. Thank you all. Again, we really appreciate you coming here. So let's start off with a scenario. So what happens after someone is sexually assaulted? If they call the police, if they go straight to the hospital, what happens? Walk us through that.
Well, I can speak to if they come to the hospital first before they report to law enforcement. They will come to the ER, and the ER staff will recognize, the need for a forensic nurse. So the way that it's supposed to happen is, in our case anyway, we're mostly on call. The forensic nurses are on call, and ER staff recognizes that this is a patient that needs forensic services, and we take care of their medical needs first. They're seen by an ER doctor who basically checks them over and makes sure they don't have any massive injuries or, big medical problems to treat before we medically clear them and call a forensic nurse in to come see them. And then one of us gets called in if we answer our phone. And sorry, that was a joke about me. Personal. It's not about me, though. A forensic nurse comes in and meets the patient and starts to determine what their needs are. And that's when we kind of get into, what a forensic exam entails. And one of the first things that we ask is if they want to report or not, and explain how that works. And sometimes at that point is when law enforcement gets involved.
So you're under no obligation to report it?
As an adult, you have the choice.
Okay.
So,
but under 18?
Yeah, so under 18, I can let Tanya speak to that, how that kind of works. But as an adult, you have a choice if you want to report or not. But if we're going to collect the sexual assault evidence collection kit, there are 2 options for that. And I don't know if we want to talk about that now or if we're going to get to that later, but yeah, there's options.
Can you cover
over
really
18.
Can you cover really quick, Alex? You said forensic a few different times, like forensic exam. You said forensic nurse. What does that mean? I don't know if people are going to be familiar with that term.
Yeah, so the older term is SANE nurses. Go ahead.
Which is described as a sexual assault nurse examiner. But there are programs that are actually doing more than sexual assaults, and those nurses are called forensic nurses. And what we actually do is anything from sexual assault to physical assault, any like penetrating injuries like gunshot wounds, stabbings, any domestic violence, child physical abuse, and legal blood draws, which would be blood draws. Sometimes the police department will bring a person in to actually have a blood draw to, kind of see if they are impaired. So we do those. So that's what the forensic nurse's role is, a little bit more than just sexual assault, just encompassing all of those things. Oh, and elder abuse, I forgot about that.
Oh,
And
yep.
so elder abuse is another.
So it's sort of like preservation of the evidence. Is that right? Like the way you do your exam is to collect and preserve evidence during an exam.
Yes,
Is
so
that
we
the
do.
forensic
Yeah, so
part of what that means?
we will see them medically, and then the forensic portion is just added. So it could be from taking photographs, collecting clothing, collecting
Gotcha.
bullet fragments, or just any kind of collection that may be needed for the for the case.
The term forensic nurse is just more encompassing than a SANE nurse. SANE stands for sexual assault nurse examiner, and I would say most of the programs we have now, we see all victims of violent crimes rather than just that sexual assault population.
Yeah.
So
if the victim doesn't want to report, do you still collect that evidence and do you hold it just in case they do down the road?
So in my case, doing pediatrics at Riley and at Methodist, and I think in Franciscan as well, if they are 17 and under, we have to report to law enforcement and to Department of Child Services. But if it is an adult, 18 or over, all that. Alex speak to that a little bit more. But
so if they're an adult and they are wanting to have a sexual assault kit, or the more colloquial term is the rape kit, collected, number one, it has to be within 5 days of the assault. Is kind of the time frame that we can collect that evidence, just based on like research that tells we can't find anything past that in most cases. But the two options, if we're going to open that kit and collect it, are we report to law enforcement where the patient is agreeing that they're going to be cooperative with an investigation, and we say right up front, this number one is always medical, like we're going to do a head-to-toe exam and treat any medical injuries that we find, and then the evidence collection we kind of do alongside that, but we don't own that. So ultimately the evidence we collect is going to get released to law enforcement either way. So to answer your question, no, the hospital does not hold anything, and that's why right up front they have to decide if they're going to report is the first option, and the second option is an anonymous report is what we call it, where we do all the same things, head-to-toe assessment and collect the kit, but we release it to law enforcement in the jurisdiction where the crime occurred without any identifiers. So we're really clear with the patient if they're opting, to do an anonymous report, that they're, the jurisdiction that we release it to is not going to, investigate anything because they have no information. They are the ones that are, I believe, hold, the kits. They never go to crime lab or anything. And it gives the victim more time to decide if they want to come forward and make an official report. I don't know if it's changed, but the last I knew is in the state of Indiana, police will hold the kits for around a year before they get destroyed, which is kind of crazy to think about. And I know a lot of states are trying to change that. But yeah, that's the two options: an anonymous report where the police know nothing and no investigation is going to occur, or like kind of fully cooperating with law enforcement and doing all the things.
So speaking of law enforcement, Dan, where do you and the police come in? So can you explain both scenarios? If the victim goes to the hospital first, when do you come? Or if they call the police first, what happens?
Okay, so starting with the hospital, if the victim were to just show up at the hospital in the emergency room like Alex described, and start to have that forensic exam done, that SANE exam done, they would be asked if they want to make a report to law enforcement, like Alex was saying. If they choose to do so, then we would get a phone call from, usually the nurse goes ahead and calls the dispatch center and asks for an officer to come make the scene. So the first person that would respond to the hospital would be a patrol officer. And then when the time allows, the officer would try to just gather some initial basic information about what occurred and not necessarily get into too far into the weeds on specific details, but to get an idea of what occurred. And if there's like a crime scene that we need to go and process immediately or not, there's a lot of variance in these cases. And sometimes there's not, the incident may have occurred in another location or at another time. So there may not be evidence for us to immediately collect. But based on the circumstances, we may need to have detectives respond as well at that time to go ahead and start an investigation. Or it may be something that we can investigate over a more spread out amount of time. It just depends on the case.
Yeah. So the patrol officer just takes an initial report. They don't collect any evidence. They don't take any photos.
So that's mostly things that the nurse will be doing during that exam. They'll collect any necessary clothing that might have evidence on it.
Okay.
They'll collect any potentially swabs or anything that they need to collect that could benefit or further the investigation. And when that's all prepared and packaged, and it's completely packaged when law enforcement receives it, it's sealed, and it is assigned a number. If it's an anonymous case, it gets assigned a number, and that way the victim can track the progression of that kit, and they can choose later if they want to make that report, and they have that number that they can reference. That would then later we can identify which kit was collected from them if they choose to come forward after making an anonymous police report or anonymous SANE exam. Excuse me.
Okay, gotcha. And which route do you guys recommend doing first? Calling the police or going to the hospital?
I think either is fine. I mean, none of these cases are exactly the same, and there's so many factors that determine, why patients present where they do, including like immediate safety concerns. Sometimes the patient has literally like escaped their attacker, and the attacker's at large, and I would rather police go, deal with that threat and make sure they don't come to the hospital after the patient rather than coming to get their statement at the time of the hospital. So I've personally had a lot of different scenarios where, like police come or police, make arrangements to see the patient immediately after I'm done with them, or like the next morning after they've slept, kind of thing. I've been across the board.
Yeah. I don't think there's a wrong way for a victim to come forward. If they're whatever is the most comfortable for the victim is what's the best for us, really, and we'll just do what we can with the situation.
Yeah, there are times too when police department will show up and then they'll speak with the patient there in the hospital, to get something, if there's something that needs immediately taken care of, that they're able to get started that way. So I've seen it happen that way too.
Okay.
So.
And what's the environment like? I'd feel like after a traumatic experience, like someone would be scared to come to the hospital. Do you keep it sort of upbeat, like a music playing? What?
Yeah, so I can talk about pediatric.
Yeah,
So
there's a lot of things that we do.
It's my specialty. So, when our patients arrive and we hear from like the triage that we have a patient, that may have been sexually assaulted, we always go and greet that patient. Usually it's with the parent, guardian, could be with Department of Child Services, or it could be with law enforcement, but we do greet them. We bring them back and kind of introduce ourselves and really establish a rapport, especially with a child, because, they're afraid of like, where am I? What am I going to be doing? What's going to happen to me? Right. So right away, like, we spend a lot of time with them. So sitting, kind of talking, sometimes we'll take time out coloring or whatever is needed just to make them feel comfortable, and kind of eventually start explaining, how the day is going to go or how the exam will go. Our exam room is very child friendly. So, you know, it has, you know, we have toys there, we have, you know, things on the wall and butterflies and different things like that. Every child gets a robe. So
wow.
we, you know, very soft plush robes. So we have robes for them. When they walk in the room, they have a fleece blanket and usually like a stuffy on the bed. And I mean, those are things that are like comforting to a child. So even after they kind of sit down and we start, you know, doing some things with them, those are all things that make them very comfortable. And all these are done like age appropriate as well. So we do all those age appropriate things. We do ask them if they know why they're there, tell them all about the exam. Now at Riley, we have what we call a child life specialist, where they are like, they go to school to learn, like play with children, play and do all those things. And so we also have them come along as well. So they are as comfortable as could be. And by the time we get to the exam, it's, you know, things go well. We always let them know there's nothing we're going to do that's going to be painful. So no ouchies or, you know, no poking or prodding into any place, because a lot of kids are concerned about that kind of thing too. So yeah, we just make that,
Yeah, that's awesome.
be very
You
clear
walk
and
them
answer all
through.
their questions and
So what about adults?
I mean, other than the stuffies, it's honestly really similar. One of our biggest goals is to give the patient all the control that we can give them choices about absolutely everything. You know, as we're explaining the exam and getting our consents and everything, we're really clear about like, you signing this is not binding. Like if at any time, you know, like I'm going to explain every single thing that I'm going to do to you. And if you decide you want to opt out, I'm going to help you make an informed decision. I'm going to let you know what we might be losing if we opt out of a piece, but I'm not going to push you past that. I'm going to make sure you understand, you know, the choice that you're making. And after that, like, you know, we're doing whatever you want to do. The exam's about them. And there's so much talking in the beginning before we even kind of get to the exam room that, as Tanya said, like the rapport is already there. Like I usually have the patient, I don't know how, but they're usually like laughing and, you know, like we're friends, you know, before we even get to the more invasive parts of the exam. And then, our exam room, we orient them to everything right away. And I always make it really clear that the photos we take are on a super secure camera that's on a completely different system than even their medical records that only forensic nurses have access to, not even medical records. So stuff like that usually helps put adults at ease. And it's similar, I would say, to...
Yeah, I think on a lot of distractions.
Yeah.
Like I use that because I do adult, adolescent, and pediatrics, and I'm one, I don't like the room quiet. So I will ask my patient, you know, if it's okay are they fine with quiet? If they're not, I'm good with that because I'm going to like talk with them through the exam, or we're going to play music or
Have your
sing,
videos up.
or or anything.
Okay.
Or I'll sometimes say, do you want to have your phone and maybe play a game or listen to music? So it's kind of up to them, but just making it like all about them and kind of how they want things.
Yeah.
And same for children, I think, when you were talking about giving them choices, like, so the children always know that you don't have to do any of this. I'm going to tell you all what we're going to be doing. If there's something you don't want or don't like, or you want me to explain more, we can do that. But you don't have to do anything that you don't want to do here.
Okay. And what about the policing side? I'm going to let you talk, but I just want to say there's always detectives and officers messing up my closet, getting swag, stickers, stuffed animals.
We're messing up the closet to get like toys and stuffed animals for the kids.
You gotta find the right sticker, the right toy.
That's right.
Oh, yeah.
Gotta look at all.
So I guess what's the question for law enforcement with regard to what you're asking right now?
Like, how do you make the victim feel comfortable? How do you keep the spirits high?
Well, it's hard to keep your spirits high when you're reporting a serious crime like this to the police. But we don't usually get to play fun music like like the nurses do. That's awesome. I wish law enforcement was that fun. But I think the biggest thing to us is showing compassion to victims as far as the comfort side of it goes. We talk about trauma-informed interviewing, and it's a way we try to interview victims of sex abuse, and it's a way that is trying to make it the most comfortable way we possibly can interview someone about something of this nature. So I think the easiest way to understand trauma-informed interviewing is just being compassionate and thinking of ways to ask questions that it might come off a nicer way than they could if you asked them a different way. We still need that information. It's important information to build the case, but we can ask it in a variety of ways that can sort of show that compassionate side of law enforcement during an investigation. And that style should be done by both the patrol officers taking that initial report all the way up to the detectives that are going to continue and further the investigation.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
And I didn't mention, just backing up a little bit, the other thing at the very beginning we do is offer an advocate. We talk about what advocates can do and see if the patient would like, us to try to see if one's available to respond to the hospital. And I've never had a bad experience with an advocate responding to the hospital. Every single time they've come, they've brought something that I have not been able to provide or wouldn't have thought to talk about, or, any of that. And that's one of their, main jobs, is to make the patient feel more comfortable and just to be an extra support.
Well, that's a good segue.
Yeah,
Norah, do you want to talk more about advocacy and where the YWCA comes in?
Sure. We can do that. So typically, I will get called out either to the hospital by a nurse or by an officer. And there are two other advocates in the YWCA program, and they will usually be called out at the shelter on our hotline. So the three of us share that responsibility. But when I'm called out, what I usually do is just kind of sit there at first, introduce myself, of course, but just kind of sit there and take in what's going on and where they are in the process. Because I've been doing this for almost 9 years now. So I try to be as intrusive as possible and give them their privacy. It varies what my role is. My background is legal advocate, so I will oftentimes do a protective order with them. A lot of times I will answer questions as far as helping them understand the legal system, what will be coming up as far as working with a detective or a prosecutor or whatever might be ahead of them. I will offer them resources, and the YWCA has a great program where we have a sexual assault center where we can house sexual assault victims and offer them resources, sometimes give them financial resources in order to get housing, all kinds of things. And so typically there's some sort of something that we can offer victims after they can leave the hospital if they need our help. And we have support groups. We have a Healing Forward group now that meets on Mondays. I think it's 6 o'clock. And that's at our shelter program. And it's an art of healing, creating a space. And then there's one that focuses on coping skills. And they use a book called Life After Trauma. And so anyone that wants information on that can call our number at 423-1118 and get that information. But we just try to assist and advocate and answer questions and just work with them with whatever's going to happen in the future, basically.
Give me my mic back. Okay, so we've gone over what happens at the hospital, but how long does that take if the victim needs, childcare or can't get away from work? Are there resources, or what can they expect?
Well, they can expect it's a pretty long process, anywhere between 4 to 6 hours.
Okay.
Plan for that amount of time. Is that?
Yeah.
It's about.
I always say minimum 4. Yeah.
No.
can you talk about why that is? Because some of the victims that I interact with want to know why, and I don't ever have an answer for them. So why does that exam take so long?
Yeah, so the exam portion does not take as long. It's more building the rapport, kind of getting the patient, comfortable with you, comfortable with the environment. And then we have like having to explain the exam and all of the options, and then signing consents and all those things. And then at the end is when we're going to do the exam.
So that's
Like doing the testing, and we have our physician, of course, that's going to come in and see the patient very first before we do anything, just to medically clear them that they don't have any medical conditions that need addressed, like now, any emergent conditions that need addressed. And then they'll come to us. So you have that period of time too.
So that's in the ER.
In the ER.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So that 4 to 6 hour, you're saying
It's
that's from
still
when they walk
included.
in the door
Yes.
till they're done completely. I got you.
So they're done completely.
And are there SANE nurses always available?
So it just depends. I think this is considered like North Central region. We still just have PRN programs, which means there are some nurses on call. Sometimes we have times that are not covered by SANE nurse because we're rare. Like there's not a lot of us in the state.
SANE nurses are a
and
diamond
it's
in the rough.
Yeah, difficult to keep SANE nurses
Emphasis
as
on the
well
rough.
because it's a difficult job to do. So I think right now Arnett has some nurses
Yeah.
Saturdays and Sundays that are there the entire day, whole 24
Like
hours,
just-
right? And
Yeah,
so-
brand new, got approved. Yeah, we have a special weekend option. We will now have someone in-house from night shift on Friday night through to day shift Monday.
Okay. So how big's the whole team?
in-house. So there's 4 of us, including those 2 weekend nurses that have been practicing, and then there's 4 more currently on orientation right now that we're training. So when we get them trained, and I guess just to finish that question, the rest of us are on call, and we have full-time nursing jobs elsewhere within IU. Some of us in the ER. We have some labor and delivery nurses. So when they're trained, we should hopefully have closer to 24/7 coverage at least, whether we're in-house or call.
Yeah, so what the goal would be is to have a nurse there 24/7.
That's the dream.
And not and not having to like call someone in. I think in the central area, in the Indianapolis area, we have nurses just in the ER, the forensic nurses that are available to see, patients anytime someone comes in.
Okay.
Methodist
I
and
didn't
Riley
realize-
are
that's-
pretty consistently.
Yeah, so Methodist and I work at Methodist and Riley, doing forensics. And so we have a team of nurses that are, that's our full-time or part-time, depends on job. And so when we clock in at, say, 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., you're there for any patients who are victims of crime during that time. And then
Okay.
the night shift as well.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
And that's
And
the gold
sometimes it
standard,
gets-
definitely, because
Yeah.
things are missed. Because for an on-call program, we're relying on ER staff to, number 1, recognize the need for a forensic nurse, and number 2, talk to the patient in a trauma-informed way, to even, see if they would be open to calling a forensic nurse in, and that piece gets bungled a lot. And it's amazing, like when programs go from being an on-call program to a staffed program, the numbers go through the roof because like these patients are just recognized more, when there's a forensic
there's
nurse
some-
in-house.
Someone there and available. That's what happened with our my program at Riley, is that we were just on call for many years, and then when we changed over to someone being there 24/7, my numbers almost like tripled.
Yeah.
So because we're then available for patients who are victims of gunshot wounds, stabbings, physical assaults, any of our children that come in who are victims of child abuse, like physical abuse, and then of course sexual abuse. We are available. So in a shift, you may have 4 or 5 patients in one shift, but if you were at home and needing to be called in, we would only call them in for a sexual assault and not the other thing. So we were missing all of those.
Gotcha.
Or like the domestic violence situations where,
Those two.
like a patient presents that, had the crap beat out of them, and, the ER nurse might not ask the right questions or offer the right things to get a forensic nurse involved, and they might miss something huge like a strangulation, which requires additional medical testing. I can't tell you the amount of times I've been called in on a patient that was a victim of some type of physical assault, usually domestic violence, where nobody specifically asked if they were strangled, but I do, and all of a sudden we're not medically cleared anymore. Like, we need to stop what we're doing and get a CAT scan of their neck. So,
and there are those things that forensic nurses know what to ask and then
Yes.
what to look for too, because strangulation does not always cause injuries too. So if you don't have a forensic nurse that has
Visible
that knowledge,
injuries, yeah.
yes, visible, something visible, it's the symptoms like, did you lose consciousness? Did you lose bowel or bladder? I mean, those are the things that, will kind of help to know how serious this may have been and have imaging done and do a full, very thorough assessment, because that patient can be at great danger for some other medical conditions that are related to being strangled.
and we miss that. Yeah, no matter the education that we give ER staff, it's a revolving door of, nurses and stuff that we'll never be able to keep up, keeping the ER staff informed of the things that we should be doing for certain patients, and that's not their fault. It's just things are better with a forensic nurse in-house.
Because we have very special training, long training, and
200 to
we have
300
to do,
hours of
like,
training. Yeah.
continuous
Yeah.
training
Yes.
as a forensic nurse.
Your ladies of many talents.
And that's why it's so difficult then on an on-call situation instead of a staffed position. You're looking for nurses that are just out of the goodness of their heart essentially willing to take on a ton more training and get called out in the middle of the night outside of their normal work hours for not probably a lot more pay, but it's a lot more burden.
no
so
more pay.
And it is a ton of training and a ton of continuing education. You can't just take a course and do on-the-job training and just work as a forensic nurse. We're required to continually have forensic education throughout our
ongoing training.
Yes.
Because the field is constantly evolving. There's
sure.
new technologies available, new techniques. There's old, processes that are getting thrown out because new studies are showing, like you can't stage a bruise. That's all of us know that, but if you're not a forensic nurse, you might not know that. There's been whole studies, showing that you can't stage a bruise or age a bruise. So just things
And
like
with that,
that.
you're talking about how it appears. You can't look at a bruise and you can't
And
determine the
say
age or
that-
how long it's been on the person.
because it's like yellowish green or something. You can't say, oh, that's old, because it just depends on how that person's capillaries and blood, how
Interesting.
that separates and how it evolves, because that could be very new today.
Yeah.
Today. But we were, I think, old was looking at a color and saying
Oh,
how
for
long
sure.
it was
I mean, I
there.
know-
Oh, that's fresh, or that, and so you learn
Yeah,
all
I've heard
those
that
things
forever.
as just kind of like in forensics. I think that
Yeah. There's
Testing
been
has
specific studies
evolved.
just for that. That's just one example. Given they lined people up and shot them in the arm with paintball guns and watched how their bruises healed over time.
That is a great way to do that.
And they completely. I know. I was like, how do I?
I love that's how we did it. It's so interesting because I know at least when I started in law enforcement, I feel like it was a common thing to
Yeah,
a
definitely.
victim show you bruising, not necessarily from a sexual assault, but just a battery case or something, and they would point out the bruising from what just occurred or from what occurred that they're reporting the day earlier or whatever. And then they would say, but this bruise here, this one is this is an old bruise from a different incident. And I feel like, it was
But,
always
we
hard. It
can't
was hard. It
confirm
was
that.
always hard for us to
Yeah.
know too. As a
because you
patrol
probably
officer,
saw a yellowed or more
I feel like
brown,
the- yeah.
They do
isn't
look
that
different,
old?
yeah.
Is that And I think a lot of us, I used to think if it's that color, if it's a yellowish, greenish color, that is only
Older.
healing in, and
Yeah.
that's an older, but that's not
Not
that's
accurate.
Not the case. Yeah, after learning all the.
Well,
things
just
we have
the
to-
science.
Yeah.
We could give a good guess, but the science doesn't support it anymore. So we are not going to definitively say,
Sure.
with confidence, this is definitely older than something else.
Yeah,
So,
that's what he or she
stuff
said.
like that.
They,
anyway,
they said
the
it
point of that
today,
was
but,
how
yeah.
much education,
Or that it was-
continuing education we have to do, because things like that are coming out all the time and changing our practice
Right.
and changing how we document
It's
things.
difficult to keep up with.
It is. unless you're constantly,
Yeah, and a lot of forensic
Doing
nurses
education.
already have full-time other jobs, and then they're on the side doing this, but then you've got that continuing education and thing that you have to have, and it's difficult to hold on to them.
Speaking of emerging
Yes.
technology, I know one thing that's been big for us lately from the law enforcement standpoint is the strangulation camera or strangulation photography that you guys have been able to do in some type of exam. Can you talk about that for a minute? I know our officers and detectives have made a lot of use out of getting this imagery that isn't necessarily fully visible to the naked eye.
You might be talking about like negative invert filters and stuff. Like you can.
Or some of our very detailed assessments, like I may be looking at you here and I don't see any like what we call petechiae, little capillaries that have burst. But if I am hone in closer with the camera, like then I can see those.
So that's not something
It's
that is
more the
unique
camera
to. So it's just
to the forensic nursing, yes, because we are doing a very detailed assessment of eyes, back of the ears, the neck, I mean, all those areas, and taking those photographs. And you go back and look at those photographs and you can see those injuries.
There's definitely a standard kind of series of photos we get for strangulation. Like in general, when we do a head to toe assessment, we take photos of anything that we see. But in strangulation, we're really we're taking a lot more photos, a series of photos of like all angles of the neck, as Tanya said, behind the ears, frenulums, the little skin flap, on your lips, uvula, soft palate, like inside the mouth.
Just very specific to those areas with photographs, and then that's how. That's why like things are missed by another, person who wouldn't be familiar.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
With
I
doing
was,
that. Yeah.
for some reason, I was in the understanding that there was some type of photography that's done that's almost subdermal. So I don't know.
I think what you're talking about, Dan, it's because we used to just use like a phone camera or a regular camera, but their cameras can actually show bruises forming on the body as they're forming. That's
Because
the
we
kind of
have,
pictures they can take. Is that what you know?
Cameras, because you guys have the same one we have too.
Cortex.
So we have it's called
Vortex.
Cortex Flow, and
Yes.
that camera, I mean, is so very clear. I mean, you can see down to
The
like
pores
your
of your
pores.
skin.
Okay.
Yes,
I knew
But
there was
with
something. I
those
knew I was
cameras.
talking about
Yes.
something that
It's
existed.
still
All right.
special, very expensive.
You might be thinking about like a
Cameras,
negative
too.
invert filter though. There's a setting that I don't understand how the technology works exactly, but it can flip
Those
some of the
filters.
contrast and stuff. I'm gonna sound like an idiot. I'm sure I'm not explaining it right. But
I'll let you go ahead and explain.
there
Continue.
it's like a filter that we can put on photos that sometimes we can see stuff when we put this filter on that we cannot see with the naked eye. It might be what you're thinking of.
Okay.
I think that's
Yeah, and like you can a lot of times see emerging bruises that in the regular view you cannot see.
I know that we've had some cases that have been strangulation cases specifically where we have sent the victims to you all for that kind of photography that we can't provide. So
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So with an increase of science and technology, have you seen the number of convictions go up?
So as far as technology, I can't really answer that, but what I can tell the public is that we have had some very successful sexual assault cases in the past few years where we have gotten prosecution successfully prosecuted, and the people have been sentenced to as much as 30 to 40 years. So we have definitely seen I think a lot of it has to do with the commitment of everybody that works on these kind of cases. Everything is tighter. People are more educated as far as the officers, the nurses, the advocates, all of us. And I think that's really helped the cases go up.
Are there any statistics about the demographics of perpetrators?
So with relationship to victims, 80.5% of sexual assaults are committed by a known individual to that victim. So that leaves a pretty small percentage, 19.5% are complete stranger. We would call them stranger rapes. So based on the scarcity of those, I mean, and we take that kind of thing extremely seriously, not to diminish the seriousness of all the other ones, and certainly serious to us as a police department and to the victims that they happen to. There's another level of violence, another level of deviance involved in a stranger rape So when we have one of those things occur, it is an all hands on deck situation for the detective division, for the Special Victims Unit, and for the police department as a whole to make sure we get that person in custody as quickly as possible, because we would view them as like a danger to our community at that point, and we want to eliminate that danger by getting that person off our streets if we can.
Yeah,
And
you actually
identify.
had one of those cases pretty recently about, what was it, a stranger who came into a house.
We did, yeah. Last week, the department investigated a case like that, yes, and we were able to act, I feel like, fairly quickly in
Yeah.
that situation.
What was quickly? It was like 2 days, right?
I didn't sleep a lot that week, so I'm going to have to go back and check. But we got a report of a stranger rape, a home invasion rape that had occurred, and we're able to, with all the resources that we threw at it, get someone in custody. And I think it was about 48 hours, maybe less. I'm not sure now, for that offense.
And what were some of those resources? Why were you able to catch him quickly?
So first and foremost, our patrol division did a fantastic job that night, locking down that area, getting a perimeter set, doing a search of the area, checking for any potential evidence that could have been left behind by a potential suspect, and trying to figure out sort of some initial things for us. And then our, victim in that situation was a very strong and brave individual, and not that everyone who comes forward isn't, just by the nature of the fact they came forward to start with, but we were able to act on a lot of information and some evidence, and we worked closely with our lab, the Indiana State Police lab, and they expedited some evidence that was left on a window, some fingerprint evidence for us that tied a suspect we had identified directly to that scene. And there was also a wallet left behind with an identification card that was a big piece of that case coming together. That helps. So,
But you still had to catch him, so
still had to
just
catch him.
because
So,
you had the wallet doesn't mean it's over.
it's not. And we did a lot of things to do that. We did a lot of behind the scenes intelligence gathering and trying to put a lot of pieces together. We actually had bloodhounds brought in from Boone County. Shout out to the Boone County Sheriff's Department, who brought bloodhounds that were able to attempt a track for that suspect. And through some of the different things that we did in the background and some of the different research that we had done, we were able to get some possible locations for where that suspect may be. And we sort of did a simultaneous we made simultaneous contact at 4 or 5 different locations, all at the same minute, to look for that individual. And because of the amount of locations we had and the potential places that individual could be, we wanted to make contact at all of them at the same time so that he wouldn't potentially be alerted by someone and flee. And it was one of those locations where we found that individual and were able to take him off the streets.
That's
So
a TV show scene right there.
Yeah.
All of you, like who's the one that like says, 3, 2, 1, bust the
Go.
door? Like, yeah. How does that work?
I got to do that, but it was on a text message, so it wasn't that cool. It was like, okay, everybody
lied, and I
walk
would've-
up. I know, I should have.
Yeah.
I'm not a good liar.
Can we give you the opportunity now
Very
to say
cool
it?
though.
3, 2, 1, go.
Nice.
That doesn't feel like
Bless
it.
him.
Doesn't feel like cool. The moments is, yeah. So yeah, it was when they come together that for us that way. That's as the Special Victims Unit, the people that investigate sex crime, child sex crime, and human trafficking here at the police department. That case is why we do what we do. We are here for the people that work in that unit are very like these nurses. They're very special people. They do this because they do it for the reward of helping someone, a true victim, and justice gotten for a true victim. I've had the opportunity, blessed, to work in a lot of different places in the police department over my career. And there's nowhere I would rather be. And it's just strictly for the reward you get out of helping a true victim who genuinely did not do anything for this thing to occur to them. And when you can get justice for somebody like that, there's a lot of reward and a lot of fulfillment behind it.
And you mentioned ISP, Boone County, nurses, YWCA. It really does seem like the entire community comes
together.
together. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. To identify a suspect, locate them, develop your case to the point where you can make an arrest, coordinate with the prosecutor's office. The Tippecanoe County Prosecutor's Office was instrumental for us as well in that investigation, just with regard to helping us with any search warrants that we may need, and all of these, the victim advocacy and the SANE individuals, everybody coming together. And it's not just one case. It's every week here. It's every day here. All of these things that are happening with all the cases that our detectives are working.
Yeah. Are you able, just for the people that don't know, and I don't have a great understanding of it either, are you able to talk a little bit about how it works, like how you guys work with prosecutors to get, like the search warrants and everything in the heat of the moment like that, when obviously like you need their permission to, move forward with some stuff like breaking into people's houses and whatnot, but just right. I don't think a lot of people understand that process and like
breaking into people's houses. It's called executing search warrants.
A sting operation, sure. But like our victims that that we're working with a lot of times have questions that I don't have a full understanding of how it works. Like when an investigation is just starting, I don't know.
So,
just curious.
With regard to, you said the prosecutor's office assisting us with getting permission. I think so. What we
or how would you phrase that?
Yeah. So we need probable cause.
Yes, there it is.
Which can, if you want the most simple definition,
I'm a nurse.
the very most simple definition, I think, which is not a legal definition at all. So don't come after me, podcast land, is more probable than not. So there's a lot more legal to it than that, but more probable than not, if you can establish that with some articulable facts and circumstances, then you would present those articulable facts and circumstances about your case to a judge in written format. He would read through it and say, yes, I believe you do have probable cause to do X, Y, Z, whether that be get a search warrant for someone's blood, get a search warrant for someone's DNA, get a search warrant for someone's house or car or whatever it is that we need to obtain for evidence, or search their phone is a very common one, to get electronic data. So it's the way the prosecutor's office helps us with that is the construction of that probable cause affidavit. So we are most often our detectives in the heat of a case, we are in close communication with them. In fact, we have a partnership with them now. It's like a major crimes task force where prosecutors are actually stationed in the Lafayette Police Department, deputy prosecuting attorneys from the Tippecanoe County Prosecutor's Office. And it's been a humongous benefit to us. So we have a case like that, and we did it with this case we referenced from last week. Deputy prosecuting attorney is right there with us. We are working that case side by side. They're writing probable cause affidavits for us as the case unfolds.
Yeah, like in real time.
Right, and we presented those two. We presented different probable cause affidavits for search warrants multiple times last week as the case developed, things that we needed to collect as evidence.
So are there prosecutors on call 24/7?
Yes, sure are.
What's the fastest you've...
We wake them up a lot.
So what's the fastest you've ever received a search warrant?
A search warrant, it's about an hour turnaround.
Oh, okay.
Sometimes less, sometimes a little more. Depends on the nature of the case. If an officer goes to a house and is knocking on the door for maybe a noise complaint and smells drugs, the odor of marijuana or something, they could apply for a search warrant for that location, and that may be a pretty quick turnaround time.
Yeah. I thought you were going to surprise me and say like 5 minutes.
Not at all. I wish.
That judge on speed dial.
Like 15 minutes.
I would love that. No, it's not. It's not. And honestly, there's a reason it's not. We need to make sure that probable cause affidavits and search warrants are founded in strong probable cause. So the need to articulate the process to articulate that to the deputy prosecuting attorney who's going to draft that document and then send it back to the officer for review and then send it back for finalization by the deputy prosecutor. And then it gets sent to the judge for review and he's going to read it. So there's a lot of eyes on it. And that's to make sure we have sound search warrants. So the last thing we want to do is have a search warrant overturned because it wasn't sound or something.
Right.
We don't want to waste anyone's time either and draft bad search warrants.
Yeah.
So
It's a pretty lengthy process.
it is. Yeah, it's one where we want to make sure we have.
It's a legal document, so.
And yeah, 100%.
I guess, the point I guess I'm kind of getting back to is it's,
I'm off the rails
it's
with your
tough
question.
No,
Okay.
you did answer it. It's when our victims, are asking, when our patients are kind of asking how it works, like being able to explain that a little bit, but also explain, how important doing a SANE exam is in this whole process.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, I guess you
Why
could
do
speak
I
to
have
that
to
more.
do
Like,
this? Yeah.
yeah, like how important are those exams to you guys? Like, is it potentially, the only evidence you're going to get?
Very much so. I mean,
Yeah.
it's monumentally important
Potentially.
that victims go and get. And if the victim comes to Lafayette Police Department first or calls us and has an officer respond to their location, whether it be home or work or wherever, that's all fine. We'll ultimately direct them to you, or you will ultimately direct them to us, as long as they're willing to make a police report and as long as they're willing to go and have that SANE exam completed.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody's forcing anybody in the situation to do anything. If they're not comfortable with making a police report, we're not going to investigate. If they're not comfortable doing a SANE exam, you guys aren't going to do one either. So this is
But they should understand that choice. Like,
absolutely.
Yeah, they should understand that opting out of the exam, they might be opting out of an investigation because you guys have to basically convince a prosecutor to, move forward with pieces of the investigation. And
Absolutely, yeah.
if we don't do the exam, it's basically like he said, she said stuff, right?
It is.
that
It does. It changes
accurate?
it significantly. I mean, the importance of a SANE exam in a sexual assault investigation is, I can't emphasize it enough. The evidence that is gathered during those exams is monumental. And you have to think about, we live in the age of CSI, the show, right? And our juries expect
They
to
want something.
see,
Yes,
our juries
they do.
expect to see that stuff. And it's been difficult for us in a sense as law enforcement is, well, we used to not, a jury did not expect us to have, GPS imagery with, tracked location data
Right.
and all of the, whatever fancy technology things that are on the show. But
nowadays they do.
they expect
Yeah.
that now. And
Yeah.
so it's incumbent on us to not only provide it, but also educate juries as to why we can't provide it. Because there's things on those shows that are not realistic at times. Their turnaround time for DNA from the lab is not overnight. And on those shows, it often is. So there's definitely an education process we do with most juries to help them understand why it might take this amount of time, why the investigation took this long, things like that.
So I have a question going off of that. You all have done a wonderful job explaining the process and the steps to take. And I think we can all agree that it's a pretty lengthy process. So how would you persuade someone to go through that and report an incident? What are the benefits?
I think the biggest thing for law enforcement is when we're talking about a person that has committed a sex offense, research shows that this person is a sex offender. And they are not just going to be a sex offender today, they're going to be a sex offender tomorrow and next week and a year from now. And so if they've offended against you, it's a brave move to come forward and tell your story and potentially have to testify in court and go get a SANE exam done. But you are doing that not just for you, but you are doing that for all the victims of that individual that come down after you. Yeah. And so I think that's one thing that I try to talk to victims about when they're feeling unsure is you're not the only one, and you're doing this for the people that he could potentially offend on or she could potentially offend on later.
I'd like to talk about the trauma and how if a victim does not tell people what happened, it's really hard for them to get past that. And so trying to sleep at night, trying to concentrate, trying to establish your life, your patterns again is nearly impossible if you don't deal with that trauma. And doing the SANE exam, talking to the police, using any kind of services they possibly can after a sexual assault is just imperative.
So how long are you in contact with the victim, like through the whole process?
Typically, for the majority of the process, it's everybody's option. But if there's a victim that we create a bond, and they do want our assistance, it'll be from the hospital all the way till the sentencing of the person, the trial, whatever the end result is. I check in on them. I'll call them. I don't go visit them necessarily, but there are times when I've met someone somewhere, in same accords or something, and we just caught up with each other, and that kind of thing. But absolutely, I think that's really important.
And after everything is resolved, are there mental health resources? What do you recommend for the ongoing mental state?
So the prosecutor's office actually has a therapist that victims can see for free. And so if it comes to that point where it is prosecuted, sometimes even when it's not prosecuted, we can get that kind of assistance. And she is actually a therapist who did her internship through our domestic violence program. So I'm super proud of her, and she does an excellent job. So yes, absolutely seeking therapy is essential.
I think we're getting to the end of our time here. But before we end this, what are some precautions people can take?
Some of the things that I think we would suggest is don't go to a party by yourself if you feel like you don't know these people, you don't really know what could potentially happen. Go with a friend and try to stay in touch with that person throughout the whole party. Keep looking for each other, making sure that you're okay. I think that's super important, especially when you're in college, those kind of years. Parking your car in an area where it's well lit. Don't walk down streets that are really dark. There's all kinds of other things. There's some great apps out there now, and I really suggest you look those up. There's apps that can have panic buttons on them. They can call the police department. They can call your friends. You can put in all kinds of things into your apps to where it really makes a big difference in keeping you safe out there.
Do you know what any of those apps are called, or do you know what they should search for in the App Store?
The list that I really like is called a Forbes Top 10, and they list the top 10 safety apps. They're not based on advertisements. They have been tested, and they're really well made, and they're not just made from Amazon. So, which is really important because you really want something that's authentic. There's even an app out called Shake Safety, where it sends an emergency message by just shaking it. So things have come a really, really long way. And so I really suggest that you do your homework, and I think that will help people feel a lot safer out there.
And I think to the point of safety, you spoke about don't go down dark streets and those type of things. That's always a great idea as well. A lot of reports that we take are individuals that went home with other individuals or went to a hotel with individuals that they just met that night. And it seemed like a good idea, but it didn't end with a good idea or end as well as they'd hoped. So I just think some of that is, if you don't know the person very well, it's maybe there's some caution that maybe should be thought through there. I understand when people are out having a good time and partying, that it's maybe that's not always the safety aspect. Maybe gets put on the back burner, but a lot of our reports come from situations where they've met someone that night, and the next day that we take a police report for a sexual assault.
Yeah, and so if something happened where you were then went with a friend that you didn't know, but then you can't remember where you went, I mean, that your ride share shows that, or if something happens during your ride share, or just where you were, if you've shared that.
So just
that
always
just
make sure
is a
people know.
timeline.
You can also
That
share
you have
your
people connected.
share
on
it in
there.
real time on Uber. You
can.
can
In real time as your vehicle is going where, or the ride share is going wherever it's going, in real time that person can see whoever you have connected on there, or they can go back to that also if it's needed by investigators or something.
Yeah. Or like even if if you're gonna leave with a stranger, you could always turn on Find My iPhone, share it with a
Yes.
close
Yep.
friend,
Yep.
just for that period of time.
And even going so far as to having a plan with that friend, like if I text, pineapple to you, like I need you to call me and act like it's an emergency and come pick me up. Like have a full plan for when you are wanting to bail on a situation.
Yeah.
Yeah,
In a bad situation.
just thinking ahead of time, you can come up with a safety plan, even just if you're like going on a date with someone.
Yeah.
That like maybe you do want to go home with them, and but like have a
check
plan.
out your surroundings.
And not all,
It's really important to check out the surroundings when you get somewhere. So just making sure like where the doors are, just how you would get out of a place if something happened. I know it takes some of the fun out of it, but it's really important anymore.
Yeah, and then you can't really be aware of your surroundings if you're looking at your phone. So those times, phone away. I mean, unless you're using one of the buttons where you can press for safety, but not looking down at your phone. People are usually looking for someone who's not paying attention.
I find that I don't enjoy looking at anything except my phone. So
Well,
Including whoever's speaking to you.
yeah, can you
in the
help
moment.
me
Yeah.
with
There's a great app called Circle of Six, though, and it allows you to connect with 6 trusted friends. And so it will, if you put those people in their name in, then it will dial one of those people in an emergency. It's just pretty incredible what we've got out there anymore.
So I think that's all the time we have today. I just want to thank you all again for joining me. This was some really good information, and hopefully it impacts someone's life.
Thank you for having
Thanks.
us.
for having us.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. See you guys next time.
Bye.
Yeah, see you around.
Hi, this week we celebrated Victims' Rights Week. And do you know what a victim has the right to do? The victim has a right to protect her body. And that means that despite the fact that sometimes we're raised in very polite societies, we have the right to tell someone we're not interested or we don't want them to talk to us. One of the things that someone can do is they can text back and they can tell them that they're not interested and to please quit texting them. My daughter, when she was in her 20s, when she would go to bars, she would walk through a crowd, and if a guy ever tried to touch her, she would look at them, touch her body, point to her body, and say, "See this? Don't touch it." And it got the message across really fast. I understand that some people don't have that kind of confidence, but if someone texts you, if someone sends you a message on Facebook, and they're starting to push you to have sex or to talk about sex, then just saying, "Look, I don't want to talk to you anymore," and then do not reply, do not respond, no matter how many times. I know sometimes we worry about hurting someone's feelings, but trust me, in these situations, these kind of people, they're not listening to their conscience and they don't care about your feelings. So please stand up for yourself and please do everything you can so that something doesn't happen to you that makes you feel helpless and not sure what to do. I do have one thing I want to tell you before we end, and that is that there's a book here called The Gift of Fear. It's an excellent book, and I would really, really encourage people to spend their summer, or a little bit of their summer, reading this book. It talks about survival tactics and how to save your life in times of trouble. It's an excellent book. And I have 4 copies in my office. If you have a hard time finding it, or if you can't afford it, then please get hold of me at my office, and I am happy to lend these out. Thank you so much and stay safe.